Welcome back, Nerdy Bunch audience. Here's your boys, Tim and Scotty, talking about Super Bowl, Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles. We are a few days away. It's currently Wednesday, so hopefully you guys listen to this podcast before you watch the Super Bowl. And we will definitely be back next week to recap. And right after this, we are going to talk about the madness that is going on in the NBA while we have the trade deadline tomorrow. And of course, it's Super Bowl week. So the NBA just wants to get their butts in line. But let's start with the Eagles and the Chiefs. So, Scotty, you've been pretty consistent that the Chiefs are going to win. Taking 2 weeks. Yeah. All right. So taking 2 weeks hasn't changed your mind at all. Andy Reid getting his fourth Super
No,
Bowl. Chiefs getting their third in a row.
you
Fourth
mentioned
in
him.
6 years or something.
Yeah,
What was that?
yeah, they'll be officially the best dynasty in the NFL. At least statistically, you could say that you
Mm-hmm.
think a certain team. I mean, some people think the Bears, 85 Bears, are the best team ever. They have one Super Bowl. So I'm not
Okay.
saying the best team, but it'll be undeniably the best dynasty on paper. It'll be hard to argue with that, especially because some of the other ones that are close, a lot of people like the Steel Curtain. That's pre agency. So if you think about
Uh-huh.
that, or you compare the Niners of the '80s and into the Cowboys, it should be harder. That was actually more impressive. They've never been a three-peat, and it should be harder with today's NFL, the more parity we have. So I think it's impressive to go win. I do think that. I mean, Andy Reid has the best record off a bye of anybody in NFL history.
Yeah.
Um,
It's been a while. Been for a while.
that it's his. He's gonna get his second dose of revenge against the Eagles. So let him go. Let his coach there. I'm sure, even as an Eagle fan, that's probably might be your only regret. And I know you like Nick Sirianni, but Andy's a legend.
I still love Andy more than Nick.
And I
Way
do
more.
think,
Way more.
yeah, I think the Chiefs win. I think it's close. If you were to give me a score, sometimes I do scores at the end. I'll just throw a score right now. I think it's going to be something like 27-23. Well, that's kind of odd number. Nobody do like a 27-24 or something, but I think something in
Sure,
that
sure.
range, say definitely under a touchdown. Definitely under a touchdown. You know, I think the spread should be Chiefs 2.5 or 3,
Sure.
honestly.
Mhm.
Right now it's 1.5. I'll be taking to cover that line because there's no point doing a money line. It's 1.5. Um,
Agreed.
and I think they pulled out. They have it in 'em. If they were any other team, I feel like they'd have more betters on their side. Like, people keep forgetting this was a 15-1 team. You throw out the last game, they didn't try. Like,
Sure.
there's only been like I think 6 15-1 teams in the NFL history. Like, that's not normally that's considered a dominant NFL team, and yet you go to the Bills, and a lot of people are like they're going to lose. Before the playoffs even started, you had people like, "Oh, if they hit the Ravens, they're going to lose." You had some people, which seemed laughable, like, Draymond Green. I know he's basketball here. He's the Draymond Green podcast. Be like, they're going out in the first round. Rex Ryan, they're going out in the first round. I'm thinking, this is a 15-1 team saying, I mean, they had the bye, so their first playoff game that some people are saying wouldn't win. Like, there's an overwhelming amount of hate, and I think that's clouding people's judgment to realize how good this team is. And
Mhm.
I do think they're going to win. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have the second best coach of all time, potentially the best,
Yeah, we'll
after
see
he
after.
retires. They have the second or first best player of all time. Mahomes is incredible. Kelsey's been super consistent, even though regular season sort of drops a little bit, at least statistically. But yeah, I mean, look, last week, 2 weeks ago, I was pretty heavy with the Chiefs. I actually wrote down 2 weeks ago, 27-24. Well, actually, no, last week. No, 2 weeks ago it would be. So 2 weeks, 27-24 Chiefs is what I guessed. And sitting in it a little bit more, I was thinking that the Chiefs would have a lot more momentum in regards to the spread and people would be betting on the spread. Um, that hasn't moved. It's still 1.5. And for me, I would think Mahomes would have like a little tax, like the Dallas Cowboys have like a tax. Like people like to bet overs on them for some reason. Dallas Cowboys, people like to bet on them to do well, even though they're a pretty shitty franchise overall, since the 90s at least. So I saw the stat that kind of made me think a little bit heavier about the Eagles. Plus, I think the Eagles have overall a better roster. It's just the Chiefs are more top heavy, better player, better coach, and the depth of the Eagles is definitely there. But in regards to the stat, the last 8 times a team has moved from the East Coast to the West Coast has won instead of West to East. 3 of those times were in New Orleans, specifically when the Patriots beat the Rams in 2002. where the Ravens beat the 49ers in 2013. And now the Eagles are potentially going to beat the Chiefs in 2024, 25 at least. It was Chiefs beat the 49ers last year. Patriots beat the Rams in Atlanta, 2019. We'll forget that. Never forget that. That was like what, 25-point deficit, monster game. But anyway, do you hear anything about that? Do you feel like jet lag's even a thing anymore? Like these players are so like prepared and they have plenty of time to, get ready. And especially when it comes to the Chiefs, they've been here the last 2 years. So
Yeah, I think it's an advantage for the Chiefs because the jet lag thing to me goes out the window because you have that 2-week break. Everybody's there as of last week because you have the Super Bowl week. This is they have all the interviews, it's like little spectacles going on. And the bigger thing is that, and you'll hear veterans talk about this or people that have been there talk about that you have to not get distracted because there's so much going on, the amount of cameras that are there. And you even have like anything from little influencers, people that won contests that get to ask a question to obviously big
yeah,
boy newspapers. You got newspapers from other countries will show up for the Super Bowl, because you go to the booth, it's translated in like 25 languages. Like, so that's an advantage for a team that's been to the Super Bowl now 3 straight years.
sure.
That's why they know the routine so well. Now, the Eagles are not at a huge disadvantage because there's only 2 years ago they were here. So I do think that more evens it out somewhat. But obviously, 3 straight years, they got this routine down. They know from bedtime to who to ignore, to the good interviews, the bad interviews, not to get soaked up in, the party scene and go out drinking or anything like that. Somebody's always going to do that. I'm not calling out names, but there'll always be somebody. But I think that's a bigger advantage. The coaches talk about this, the different routine, the game. You hear people talk about because the game is longer, halftime is longer, the
Sure.
the pregame, that you have to warm up differently because you could get cold because there's so much hype beforehand. Even the national anthem is longer. Like the prep that players have to change their warm up times, and then like
Mhm.
so the longer halftime. Sometimes players do different routines. They'll go on an exercise bike during halftime just to keep themselves loose. And if you've done that 3 straight years, that's an advantage, I think. Even though there has never been a three-peat, there has been multiple repeats. And I think that shows if you think of the repeat Patriots, repeat the Broncos before that. Now, I'm not saying they don't get there very often, not like the NBA, but
Uh-huh.
if you get there back to back years, you actually tend to win that second year. Is a weird stat in that way. And I think that's partially because you have such an advantage of knowing the routine down and knowing exactly how to prepare, what to do. Like I said, from the pregame to the national anthem warm up to the halftime to not being nervous. That first quarter, you're always extra nervous. And even though a lot of the Eagles have been there just 2 years ago, who's the,
Mhm.
the best player in the Eagle? Is Saquon.
Right
He's
now,
never been here.
Saquon. Yeah,
He's never
yeah.
been there. Who is maybe probably who's their best defender? My opinion, Jalen Carter. He's it's like second year pro, never been there. So I would say arguably their two biggest impact players. To me, it's Saquon. I would actually say Jalen Carter's their second biggest to me impact player. That's
And
my
their
opinion.
defense is so different this
Yeah.
year. I mean,
So
they were 26th in the league last
mhm,
year, and
those
they lost
people
in the
are
wild card
actually
round.
new people there that are going through the emotions differently. Yeah, Jalen Hurts had been there, but I'm saying some of their most key players
Yeah,
and the defense as
yeah.
a whole has to go through this as the first time.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, look, Mahomes is gonna be fine. Andy Reid's gonna be fine. Typically, these Super Bowls start off pretty slow, but I could imagine. I mean, look, if Mahomes gets the first touchdown, it's gonna be really hard for the Eagles to come back. The Eagles are used to keeping up, creating a momentum, sorry, getting the lead and then keeping that momentum, so they could rely on the run game. And the Eagles have been super consistent this year. This is actually the most I've watched them in a while. But the pass game is really unreliable. AJ Brown, who knows what you're gonna get out of him. They have depth from Goddard to Smith, but I can't rely on this passing game. I could count on the defense, even though they're new guys, even though they're fresh guys. And look, they were literally second in defense 2 years ago, 26th in defense last year, first in defense this year. But they were also third in offense 2 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl and lost. Then they were eighth in offense last year, eighth in offense this year. So technically, they're a little worse, aggregate wise from their Super Bowl loss. And the Chiefs, statistically, I guess, are a little worse, but like we keep saying, they're 15-1, they're prepared, and they save these plays for now. Tom Brady just was on the herd, and he was talking about, preparation, how much advantage it is to have an extra week. And he installed 3 critical plays versus the Seahawks. 2 of them were touchdowns, one to Danny Amendola, and one was the first touchdown, I believe, to his tight end. He installed those Friday night. These guys are just gonna come out with trick plays, and if there's anything hopefully the Eagles can learn from the Bills is don't just rely on what worked for you in the regular season. As we spoke about last week, the tush push, the Bills were even better than the Eagles. But last week or 2 weeks ago when they lost to the Chiefs, they kept going and kept going and kept going and hoping that this play that has so much film, so much tape, so much information to study, clearly the Chiefs were ready for it, but they kept hitting and couldn't do anything different. I don't really have faith in Sirianni, but I would think this line has to show us that, like, the Eagles have much more of a chance than I'm really truly giving them credit for. And trust me, I'm never gonna even if they were 12.5 point underdogs, I would still have hope and root for them. But this Chiefs team is one to wreck with.
Yeah. You mentioned the trick play in the beginning. It crossed my mind. I couldn't help but to think of actually the Lions in the end of the season when people said, "I hope they still have some trick plays left," when they were showing off
Uh-huh.
that fake fumble to the Bears.
Yeah.
And the Chiefs are a little bit the opposite of that. I mean, they'll use some trick plays in the regular season, but they save their best stuff, and they'll pull out a play that they haven't used all year. They get the final first down against the Bills, and they pull out a play they didn't use all year. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, we're saving that because you know what? We needed it now." So there it comes out. If you remember when they played the Eagles 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs' final 2 touchdowns, the receivers were wide open. That was all coaching. They had one to Sky Moore, one to Kadarius Toney. Neither are even on the team anymore. But their final 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, both times the receivers wide open, and it's like they had plays that they were saving for the very last 11:59 on the hour, Super Bowl fourth quarter, final couple of drives, and like, okay, we have a couple plays they're not ready for.
Mhm.
Like that's coaching. When people open up that open, I mean, that Mahomes is the best, but that's coaching when they're that open. If you look at those plays,
Oh, yeah.
but if you wanna go to just not overcomplicate it, and coaching could seem to be, like, a more complicated thing, it might
Sure.
just come down to straight up rushing the ball. I
Uh-huh.
mean, here's a couple interesting stats, is the Chiefs did not give up a single 100-yard rusher this season, outside of Lamar
Wow.
Jackson game 1, but not a single running back to get 100 yards this season. Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator, has never given up a 100-yard runner in the playoffs. So you have 2 factors of not giving them up. The Eagles couldn't run at all in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Jalen Hurts had a bunch of running, 70 yards, but the running backs did nothing. Like Boston Scott, Miles
Yeah, they
Sanders.
had, like,
uh,
Miles Sanders at that point.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
really
the
did
running backs are definitely
nothing.
better now.
And on the
Um,
flip end of that, you could just look at Zaquan. So Phillies played 20 games this year, I believe, because they had the
mhm.
extra wild card game compared to the Chiefs,
Sure.
right? And they won 17 games if you count the playoffs. They won 17
Uh-huh.
games. So they lost 3.
Uh-huh.
But of those 3 losses spread out, you could look at it this way, that they're 3 they're 3-2 when Zaquan rushes under 100 yards. Right? They're 17-1 when he has over 100 yards. And the one loss that he had over 100 yards was the game that Kenny Pickett came in. So in every game he's had 100 yards that Jalen Hurts has played, they won.
Washington, damn.
Uh, uh, Kind of basically the line is right is it's very much rock at a hard place. If he goes
Sure.
over 100 yards, and forget his projection, which is higher now, I think it's 112, I want to say, but forget his
Mhm.
projection. If he breaks the 100 yard, they basically win every game, and they've won every game Jalen Hurts has played. I'll put it that way. They're one loss game Kenny Pickett. But on the other hand, if he goes under 100, they're 3-2. They still won a couple games, but like, just okay. And the Chiefs are a team that hasn't given up a 100-yard runner this game. So this is definitely 100% the, rock versus a hard play. Something's got to give here. And if you could see the future and see one stat, not normally you always go with the turnover stat. Who wins the turnover battle? But if you just go
Sure.
to the running back stat, how many yards does Saquon have? You could say, well, if he had 95 even, they probably lose. If he goes over 100, they're going to win.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are 10 turnovers to 0 so far in the playoffs, and that's why they're cruising through the East, the NFC. But it's Saquon's birthday, baby. It's his 28th birthday, and he's plus 280 to win MVP, plus 280 to get 2 touchdowns. I think that's some karma there. I feel like Saquon's gonna have a wonderful day. And if there's any player I feel confident about, it's the fact that Saquon's gonna be able to get a few massive, massive returns right down the field. But would you pick Kelsey to be more reliable? Do you feel like Kelsey's like that
I mean,
stone cold lock pick of the week, as you said? Like, would you rely on
I
Kelsey
do
or
like Kelsey. He's not
Barkley
my
or
number 1
other?
pick of the week. I
Okay,
like I
who
like
would be number
Kelsey.
1?
He's had entering the Buffalo game, which was his actual worst playoff game ever. He had
Uh-huh.
14 straight games of plus 70 yards, which covers his betting projection. So that was like, I mean, that's crazy. What the previous record was 8. I still think he can do very well, but if you want to go for my lock of the week, is what's going to happen. All right,
Let's do it.
it's Patrick Mahomes over on rushing yards. All right,
Yeah, I agree with this one too.
this I'm going to read you a couple of stats here because the main key is that he plays differently in the playoffs, and he really plays differently in the Super Bowl. In the regular season, he averages 19 rushing yards per game on
Mhm.
3.25 attempts, 3.26 attempts. Okay. In the
Okay.
playoffs, sorry, in the Super Bowl, forget about the playoffs, because in the Super Bowl, he amps it up. If you look at the wild card round, it's basically they don't need him. He only does it when he need him.
Mhm.
In the Super Bowl, he averages, I actually wrote this down here just to make sure I got it exactly right. He averages 43 rushing yards a game, over double. Regular season 19 in the Super Bowl, and he has a nice sample size, 43. Not only does he average 43, but his line for your Stone Cold Locker Week, his line is 28.5. So he needs
Mhm.
29. In 4 Super Bowls, his worst Super Bowl was 29. So he's never not covered that line. And because he's
Yeah.
been there so often, it's actually a decent sample size, including his worst Super Bowl. We're just talking running loss here, not even talking about the Tampa game, whatever. Was 29 yards, was his first win against the Niners. In that game on the final drive, since they were up 10, he kneeled out 15 yards. He actually had 44 yards before the kneeling started. In the other 3 Super Bowls, they were close games. He didn't kneel out the clock at all. It was either the other team ended with the ball or they ended to kick the field goal. So he averages 43 yards. That's if you include the minus 15 there. Otherwise, it would actually be up to 47. With a line of 28.5, I think this is the lock of the week. He's never not covered this in the Super Bowl.
So instead of the 28.5, if you're worried about the kneel downs and you think the Chiefs are gonna win, would you rather go with longest rush? I think that's like 10.5 yards, or would you rather go with total rushing attempts, which is 5.5?
I personally am going to play 2. I'm gonna do with the yards, and I'm gonna do a parlay of all 3 for a bigger payback. You
Okay.
can parlay all
Sure.
3. That's gonna pay back about 6 to 1. As far as attempts go, his attempts, he's covered that in 3 of his 4 Super Bowls. His line is 5.5. His worst Super Bowl, he had 5 attempts. The other 3 Super Bowls, he had 7, 9, and 11. So he's covered that, and he averages 7 and 2.7.25 attempts. So that is also a good one. And his longest run has been over 10.5 in all 4 Super Bowls. So he has covered that in all 4 Super Bowls. You know what pops in my mind, honestly? And those who are a little older, I feel like you shouldn't be older, but like my age, John Elway and the helicopter touchdown. If anybody remembers that Super
Oh,
Bowl against the
yeah.
Packers, very famous clip, and
Got
I think we should
clipped,
all remember,
spun
but I
around.
understand there's some Gen Zs that might not remember that one. It's like John Elway was not a super scrambler, especially at that age. When he was younger, he could move. But the point being that even the interview afterwards talks about that, it's the Super Bowl, you don't care.
Mhm.
Quarterbacks are coached differently than anybody else. Running back is get every yard, fight, rip your fingernails. Quarterbacks are told if it's a regular season, go out of bounds, slide. You can't get injured. But then you get to the playoffs, and they're generally told, okay, fight for the yard, and particularly the Super Bowl on top of that. Because if let's say you're winning by 14 in the playoffs, maybe you might still slide. It's the Super Bowl. There is
Okay.
no next day, obviously. You're told, hey, play like a running back. You get hit in the head, sorry, too bad. Just go all out. There's no stopping. And you'll see that, honestly, all the quarterbacks just this playoff sample. So there are a lot of running quarterbacks, but their lines are set higher. They were all covering the line at over an 85% ratio. If you just bet every quarterback this season, this playoffs, and you said over your rushing. Jaden Daniels was covering it. Lamar Jackson, even even guys that only played one game, they were all covering their line because they were like, screw it, I gotta go, I gotta run. It's the playoffs. There were, I think that of 12 games, I think quarterbacks covered it in 10 of 12 games.
Yeah, I believe it. And look, the Eagles play well split safety, so it kind of pulls the safeties back. And that's another thing where they got to switch it up. Like Vic Fangio's got to do something different. Got to keep Mahomes guessing because they're going to be prepared for anything, and they're going to be able to go into the halftime, take advantage of the Kendrick Lamar extended halftime show, which I'm sure people are very excited about, given all the Drake Kendrick beef going on. But we're going to keep this to sports, not the Grammys that happened this past weekend. Um, but look, Mahomes and Barkley are my 2 best prop bets. I feel like I would trust Kelsey, but outside of those 3, I don't really know what's gonna happen. I think getting Chris Jones sack plus 135 seems like a solid bet. I don't know what, Cooper DeJean's tackles are, but, he's been super reliable. Zach Bond potentially, but, Zach Bond was just a special teams guy. And Cooper DeJean was, I think he's a rookie. And so I can't exactly rely on those guys, even though they've been super consistent. So even though it's Saquon's first Super Bowl, it is his birthday. He is one of the greatest players in the game. He is the leader of this team. And I'd be shocked if he didn't at least get the workhorse load. They may, switch it up. I feel like maybe Devonta Smith for some sneaky. No, actually, Dallas Goddard's got to be the guy. If you're going to
I like
pick,
Goddard. He's my
yeah.
final bet. Chiefs are dead last against tight ends this year. 32nd.
Oh,
Yep,
I didn't
they're
know that.
32nd.
Okay.
Goddard
Okay.
is played the Chiefs twice in his career, and this includes the last Super Bowl, and then one time before that. He's had 60 and 56 yards. His line is
Mhm.
50, so he's covered that in what would be both games. And he's covered it the last 2 games they played Washington, LA. Chiefs are dead last, and keep in mind with Jalen Hurts as being a running quarterback, Chiefs are going to play a little bit of spy. They played some spy in the last Super Bowl. That opens the tight end up a little more. So I think they're going to be willing to give up the tight end. They don't want to give AJ Brown over the top. If they're going to give up anything, I think it's going to be Goddard. So I think
Mhm.
he has a very good chance for a great game. He's a really, really dark horse, super dark horse MVP, actually.
So thinking about it now, the Chiefs have had so much turmoil this year. They've had, I mean, obviously we feel like the refs are not on their side. We feel like it's fair, even though, guys like Mad Dog Russo, like spitting out the like 60-36 like calls or whatever it is, like, okay, maybe the Chiefs are just like coached better and they don't make stupid decisions like the Washington Commanders did last week. But like I'm a little concerned about the Chiefs' offense, even though they do have Mahomes, they do have Kelsey, they do have Hopkins and Worthy and a lot of great guys. They were 16th in the league this year in yards. That's not making me feel great. They went from their last like Super Bowl victory in 2019. They went sixth, first, third, first, ninth, 16th. Big drop. And obviously, there's a reason why it's really hard to do a three-peat. It's really difficult to continue and keep this momentum up. And like Hopkins really isn't much of a weapon right now in regards to his age and I guess the familiarity Mahomes has with him. But this is the type of event where a player of his caliber could be like, look, this may be my last game ever, and I'm going to pop off. Or Kareem Hunt, hasn't really been super consistently involved in that. And he's been hurt. And that's why he's a big waiver wire target in fantasy football, where he did absolutely nothing at the end of the year too. But versus the Bills, we were chatting on our chat, and I was like, "Yo, this guy's gonna get 2 touchdowns," and he got one because Mahomes got two. But there's definitely something to grab at if you feel like the Eagles are actually going to be able to compete with them. But if we all think it's a close game, there's nobody I'd rather pick than Mahomes at the end of the game. There was a reason why, like, I was watching that, Falcons game and Brady was down 25, and I'm like, "Yeah, but you still can't count this guy out." Like, same with Mahomes. Even if somehow Saquon gets 2 touchdowns in the first half and they're up, 14, 15 points, nobody's gonna be like, "Oh, Mahomes is done." Like, no. he's always gonna have a shot, even if there's, like, 5 minutes left and they're down 2 scores, and they have a good enough defense. I mean, they're ninth. They were 2nd last year, in their Super Bowl victories. They went from 17th, 16th, 27th, 11th, 2nd, ninth. But, like, you don't win a game on paper. We are nerds and we do like the numbers, but you win with leadership. You win with experience. You win with poise. That's why I have a lot of faith in Jaden Daniels in the future.
Well, I think what you have to realize is the Chiefs are their healthiest right now, literally of the
Yeah.
entire season. Like even
Mhm.
most teams start the healthiest in game one, they actually weren't the healthiest in game one because they didn't have Hollywood Brown. And so if you just look at as of the Pittsburgh game, which was Hollywood Brown's first game with the Chiefs, and that was basically the turning point of their health. They got Hollywood Brown and they got Pacheco back, although he's actually been the number two running back since he's come back.
Yeah.
And they had obviously they had Hopkins, who they got in midseason. So they're the healthiest they've ever been. But since then, they could say, all right, they played Pittsburgh. Uh, sorry, actually, the week before that, they played Tennessee. This is week 14. They had 27. They had 27 points against the Texans. Then the sorry, I had that week wrong. That was the week after Pittsburgh. The week before they played Pittsburgh, they had 29. Then they had 27. Then they took the week off, the Bronco game. Then the
Sure.
division round, they have 23, but they knew out the clock where they could score. They're in scoring range. And then they play the Bills and they score 32, their higher scoring game. That their best offensive streak has been their final two regular season games, the ones that the starters played, and their
Sure.
two playoffs games. In this little stretch, you're averaging 27 points a game for a regular
Yeah.
season. I believe they're at like 23 and a half. So their offense is much better. It's the healthiest it's been outside of the fact they lost Rasheed Rice, but still they got Hopkins to replace him, so to say. And you got Brown, who you didn't have before. You have Hunt, who now you have a two-headed running back instead of one. And you have Worthy, where rookies get better during the season. Generally, they get kind of a lot of times for receivers, they get a bounce after the bye week. And if you look at Xavier Worthy, since the first Buffalo game in the regular season, he hasn't had a game under 40 yards, and he's been trending way up, including his last game, his best game of the season, 85 yards. He's been playing way better. His last three games, 85, 45, 79, 65. He's been playing better. So I feel like the offense is locked in at the right time, and they basically picked up a Hall of Fame tight end. Because let's be honest, regular season, Kelsey's at the point where he takes weeks off and kind of coasts, and then he gets to the playoffs. And although last week against the Bills, he didn't play good, it was the week before that. He has 117 yards, two touchdowns. He's crushing it. So I feel like their offense is a much different offense. We're just thinking, oh, the Chiefs, they never scored 30 points. They never scored 30 points. They never scored 30 points. Last week, oh,
Uh-huh.
they scored 30 points. Like, so it seems like when they have to, it's there.
Exactly. That's exactly what my last point is gonna be. Every single week, you always kind of felt it. Whatever the Chiefs needed to do to win, they would. And if it's by 3 or 20, doesn't matter. A victory is a victory. And that's why I still think 27-24 Chiefs. How about you? What's your score? You were saying
Very similar.
27-23.
27,
So
23. Yeah.
we're on the same boat
Very
again. So it's
similar.
probably not gonna happen. All right, before we wrap this podcast up and we move to the NBA, anything else you gotta say?
I thought a lot of people did do this. I'll throw out ours. Dark horse MVP, take out the top guys.
Okay.
Even though I'm picking the Chiefs, if I thought dark horse, I'm actually gonna go with Jalen Carter. I'm gonna say that the Eagles can only
Okay.
win obviously through Zaquan, but I think if he has a
Yeah.
monster game and can destroy the front line, that would be my dark horse. You can't pick the
What's his odds?
quarterbacks. He's paying back. I believe it's plus 1100. You get really good on that one.
Okay. Sure. I mean, look,
Uh,
defensive players rarely win, but yeah, I mean, look, if
but I
he
want
gets
you
a
to give me a dark horse.
safety, couple
Don't get no
sacks,
Zaquan, no Mahomes. Give me something a little farther down the line.
look, I'm a cautious man, especially when it comes to betting. And Saquon's got to be my guy if I'm going to pick one. But since I'm picking the Chiefs, it's even money. You got to pick Mahomes. Mahomes is a guy. He's consistent, and he's going to make it happen. He's an all-star. Look, I really hope the Eagles are going to win. I hope Saquon's going to have 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Hurts is going to. I feel like if Hurts just gets like 250 passing yards, it's game over. Like if they have any sort of rhythmic flow to their offense, passing wise, done. No chance. We'll see. All right, Nerdy Bunch audience. Thank you for coming back for another podcast. We will be jumping into the Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis trade right now and talking about some other shocking news, but nothing's more shocking than that trade.
No,
But as always, Scotty,
keep it dirty.
peace.